Hello, it is so good to have you here on the channel once again. Today we will relive one of the most extraordinary days in all human history. Did you know there was a day when the sun stood still in the sky for as long as needed at the request of a servant of God? It is true. All creation witnessed the power of faith in action. Picture the scene. 5 kingdoms unite to attack a single kingdom, and this kingdom is an ally of Israel. Desperate, the king of Gibeon sends a plea to Joshua. Do not abandon your servants. Come quickly, save us. All the Amorite kings who live in the hill country have joined forces against us. God told Joshua he could go without fear, and he went. In this battle, something extraordinary would happen, something only faith and divine power could accomplish. Nature would bow to the command of a man who did not doubt the impossible. And what Joshua and the entire army experienced at Gibeon became an eternal symbol that when we pray in faith, heaven moves, time bends, and the impossible becomes reality. But this is just the beginning. In each chapter, new revelations make this victory even more vivid. Stay with me to the end, and your perception of the impossible will never be the same. Let us travel through. The night was quiet in Gilgal. The stars shone over Israel's camp, reflecting on the spears lined around the tents. Joshua was awake in prayer. The messenger had arrived moments earlier, covered with dust and exhausted, bringing urgent news. Gibeon was under attack. 5 Amorite kings had joined forces against the city that had sought refuge under its covenant with Israel. Joshua remained on his knees, his mind filled with recent memories. He still heard the words of the Gibeonites, who, disguised as travelers from afar, had asked for a treaty of peace. It had been a mistake to seal that covenant without first seeking the Lord. Yet the treaty had been made in the name of God, and for Joshua, that was sacred. Now those same men were crying for help. And even though they had deceived Israel, Joshua knew the honor of the name of God was at stake. The people murmured, questioning whether they should risk themselves for such doubtful allies. But the leader, with a steady gaze, answered, "We have sworn before the Lord, and whatever is done before him must be kept." As the army prepared, Joshua went into the tent of meeting. The lamplight flickered over the improvised altar. There he poured out his heart in supplication. He did not ask for glory or recognition, but for strength to be faithful, even when fidelity was costly. When he rose, peace rested on his face. The same God who had once said to him, "Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go," was with him again. Shortly before midnight, the sound of trumpets broke the silence. The army marched north, along the rocky slopes from Gilgal to Gibeon. Nearly 40 kilometers of harsh terrain. Torches swayed like moving stars. The cold wind carried the echo of footsteps, yet weariness mastered no one. There was something supernatural in that march. The soldiers felt that heaven itself was leading them. With every step, Joshua recalled the promises made to Moses. "No man shall be able to stand before you." It was as if the Lord marched at his side. The writer Ellen White describes this moment by saying that God sent his angel ahead of Joshua. The divine presence lit the path and strengthened the weary warriors. When dawn began to brighten the horizon, Gibeon was already near. The mountains cast long shadows over the valley. Joshua climbed a rise and surveyed the besieged city. Below lay the army of the 5 kings, a mass of armed men, confident in their numbers. But Israel's leader did not fear. He knew that day would not be decided by human strength. A certainty settled in his heart. It was not presumption nor pride. It was faith. The same voice that had spoken to Moses now assured him, "Do not fear those kings. I have delivered them into your hands." Joshua raised his sword and the signal was given. The attack began under the amber glow of dawn. The sound of trumpets filled the valley like thunder. The enemy was caught by surprise. Panic spread through the Amorite ranks. Israel advanced like an unstoppable torrent, moved by a strength that did not come from the earth. Israel pressed the Amorite army as it fled, climbing the hills and plunging down the precipice beyond. Then something extraordinary began to happen. The sky thickened with heavy clouds, and from above great hailstones fell upon the enemy. They were so large and so precise that not one Israelite was struck. The ground shook. The Creator himself had entered the battle. It is a hard thing to fight against the powers of heaven. Joshua lifted his eyes and understood. The Lord was fighting for Israel. And as he watched the enemy fleeing in desperation, a deep conviction formed in his mind. This war would not end at sundown. Something within him knew that the God of the universe would not allow the shadows to win that day. The army continued to pursue the enemy through valleys and hills. Sweat mixed with dust, feet bled, yet no one wished to stop. The men looked toward the horizon, and in Joshua saw a strength not his own. His face seemed to reflect light. He moved at the front, showing neither fear nor doubt. As the sun climbed higher, the heat made the fighting exhausting. Even so, Joshua's heart remained calm. He knew the God who had opened the sea, stopped the Jordan, and brought down the walls of Jericho. And now he knew he would do something even greater. When the day drew near its midpoint, Joshua looked to the sky. The sun shone over Gibeon, and the moon rose over the valley of Ajalon. He knew there would not be time to finish the work the Lord had given them to do. But what no one imagined was that on that very day, an impossible command would be given, and heaven would obey the voice of Joshua. The descent of Beth Horon lay behind like a gash in the mountain. Joshua's army fought with the same resolve and kept close behind the fleeing ranks. The hail no longer fell as before, but the ground was scarred by blocks of ice, and every stone seemed to glint as if the light itself made it burn. No one stopped. Dust rose in clouds and their breath burned, yet their feet did not fail. The Amorites tried to escape through the valley of Ajalon. Israel advanced in waves along different trails, and at every bend another skirmish appeared. The sun, however, kept its course. The light began to tilt, and Joshua felt the weight of clear judgment. If shadow reached the valley, the work would be left half done. They would not finish what the Lord had given them to do. Joshua paused for a brief moment on a ridge. His face turned to the sky, his eyes fixed on a point only faith can see. Inside there was only faith and certainty. The God who traced the paths of the heavens and set the seasons is not a prisoner of the laws he created. When salvation needs more time, time obeys. He stepped down a few paces, stood where all could see, and spoke with a clear voice so that men and heaven would hear. Sun, stand still over Gibeon. And you, moon, stand still over the valley of Ajalon. The sun stayed in place. The moon did not advance. There was no crash. There was a resting of the world, a pause at the heart of the universe, as creation acknowledged the authority of the Creator, declared through the faith of his servant. Then the chase resumed, and the light did not change. Under the same extended brightness, Israel's companies spread across the valley. Some cut off the retreat on the right. Others closed the pass along the hills. The ground was uneven, but their steps were steady. Each small fight ended quickly, as if the very light shortened the enemy's strength. No one looked at the sky in doubt. It held the same morning that refused to leave. The author of creation had placed the sun in the service of salvation. The pursuit went on without a break. Seas of grass bent, Ravines opened, and still the brightness remained. The enemies, once proud, scattered into small pockets, and each pocket meant an end. Some tried to hide among rocks and caves, others to reach the plain. Neither escaped the encirclement. The same day witnessed the beginning, the middle, and the end. If this remarkable story is touching your heart, be part of this growing community. Walk with us. Subscribe to the channel now and tell us in the comments what has most moved you in the story so far. Your simple gesture helps this message reach those who need a day extended by grace. The clamor of weapons faded, not from fatigue, but because the work was done. When the last enemy band dissolved into the dust of the trails, Israel did not celebrate with noise. For a moment, all simply looked up. The brightness that had stood still, faithful like a sentinel, finally began to yield, as if heaven released the clock with care. The wind returned to move through the grass, and with it the ordinary sound of the world. Joshua stood, breath heavy yet calm. There was no pride on his face. There was reverence. He knew his voice had not stopped the sun by human power, but by communion with the God who opens the sea, holds back rivers, and brings down walls. The order he gave was not born of haste. It was born of certainty. The certainty that the Creator who governs the course of the stars hears the prayer aligned with his purpose and, when he wills, bends time so the mission is not left half done. There was only one day of battle, and in that single day everything was decided. The same light illumined the march, the surprise, the hail, the pursuit, and the victory. The account that would arise from it would say there was a time like no other, because the Lord listened to the voice of a man, and because the Lord fought for Israel. Not so a human name might shine, but so a generation would learn the difference between demanding and believing, between presumption and faith. The people began to move slowly, gathering weapons, tending the wounded, regrouping the ranks. Children who would one day hear this story at the tent doors would learn to tell the miracle without hurry, saying there were not 2 mornings or 2 evenings, only one sun and one obedient moon, held from above until the mission was complete. When Joshua walked again, he did not look for a throne. He looked for a place of prayer. That is how a day ends when heaven moves. The man returns to God the glory that borrowed light can give. And the one who had ordered the sun to stand still lowered his gaze to the earth, certain that the greatest power is not in commanding, but in obeying. The battle quieted the sword, but it did not quiet the leader's heart. What the prolonged day revealed about him did not fit in the clamor of the valley. Only when the noise faded and there was silence between the man and the eternal did the deepest truth come through. And that is where our story must now go, because what no one imagined is that the day that did not end lit something in Joshua that no night could extinguish. The obedient nature that served Joshua's army that day will one day serve judgment again, and this promise will be fulfilled in our day. The same God who fought with Joshua against his enemies will arise in the last days, and we will discuss this in the next chapter. When we see 35-kilogram stones falling without striking the soldier who is fighting for God, but falling upon the enemy, when we see the sunlight stretched over the valley for nearly 24 hours beyond normal after a prayer, we realize something supernatural was happening there. God is fighting for Israel. Even so, Joshua did not fold his arms. The command that stopped the sun was not a shortcut to rest. It was a summons to keep fighting to the end. He moved to the front, adjusted formations, redrew lines, reorganized scattered groups, and pushed the advance along paths only trained eyes can see. The leader did not wait for victory to fall from the sky. He worked with heaven before him. The men saw him sweaty, covered in dust, sparing not even his own life. That spoke deeper than any speech. The daylight was a miracle. The leader's movement, an example, and an example that pulls others along. The warriors realized that the prayer which commands the heavens is the same that shapes discipline on earth. No one fell back. No one yielded to the notion that the God of the miracle would do the rest alone. Joshua's influence spread through simple gestures. His authority did not make him harsh but firm. Those under him knew whom they followed and obeyed. The son had obeyed the leader, but the leader obeyed God. The voice that ordered the light to remain was born from the certainty that the mission could not be left halfway. The same certainty kept him from negligence when the fight tightened. He did not ask the sun to stop to admire a spectacle. He asked that the army have enough light to fulfill its duty. The faith that moved heaven required arms that moved the earth. The pursuit continued in steady cadence. Israel's warriors looked at the unmoving brightness and knew that day would never be forgotten. And when they turned their eyes to the leader, they understood why the light stayed, not to exalt a man, but to reveal how obedience and courage multiply in the life of one wholly surrendered. What has your experience with the God of the impossible been like? He is still able to move mountains and halt the heavenly bodies for his children. Just trust. As long as there was mission to fulfill, the sun did not move from its place, and all went to the end. That was the legacy of that day. A people who learned not to hide behind the miracle, but to walk within it with the responsibility of those who know where victory comes from. When the clamor of weapons faded, eyes naturally turned to the houses of Gibeon. From afar, faces appeared in the doorways, hands were raised, quiet tears were seen. It was not only Israelites who were learning to trust, and other people were being forged by the experience of that day. And it was toward this newborn faith that the story needed to turn, because the miracle did not transform only the battlefield. It also marked hearts that had lived in fear and deception, and were now beginning to understand the mercy of the living God. The city that had cried for help now breathed relief. Doors creaked open, children peeked from behind garments, and the elders stepped out slowly, as if afraid of waking from a dream. Gibeon was alive. The people who once disguised themselves out of fear now spoke without masks. The light that had not left the sky had not left their hope either. There was in those streets a reverence born when the impossible touches the dust of the earth. Families gathered before Joshua and the leaders of Israel. There were no long speeches, only gratitude. Men who carried the weight of their deception bowed down and declared they would rather serve the God of Israel for the rest of their lives than return to the gods that had abandoned them to fear. From that day on, their lives would be marked by service, not out of humiliation but by choice. They had found at the altar of the living God a place for their hands and for their hearts. Israel also learned. It had been painful to deal with the cunning that brought them into this alliance, yet the Lord turned that initial mistake into an occasion of grace. The spared city now knew firsthand both the justice and the mercy of the Almighty. Around them, the land spoke of judgment against idolatry. Within the walls, survival spoke of a hand firm but not cruel. That extended afternoon echoed with a simple song. There were no instruments of celebration, only voices. Israel sang because they understood that faithfulness keeps promises even when it costs. Gibeon wept because they saw that truth sustains those who cling to it with sincerity. The faith of both peoples grew that day, under the same light, for different reasons yet toward a single purpose, to recognize that the Lord reigns over all. Some Gibeonites brought water and wood for the sacred service. The gesture was small but full of meaning. Those who have stood near the altar learn to love the God of the altar. In time, those once marked by fear became known for zeal, Proximity to the sanctuary did not make them ordinary, it made them aware. Faith is not born only from seeing God's miracles. It grows through communion and convictions formed in the presence of the Eternal. In Israel, fathers pointed to the sky and told their children what they had witnessed. It was not a story to entertain around the fire. It was a memory meant to shape the heart. They taught that the hand which stopped the sun is the same hand that upholds the family, heals wounds and restores courage. The cosmic miracle became a household lesson. Immense glory found its place in simple things. If this story is strengthening your faith, walk with us. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and tell us in the comments which country and city you're watching from. Your voice helps spread hope and encourages us to keep sharing stories that rekindle trust in God. When the people returned to their routines, something new lingered in the air. Israel moved forward with a deeper certainty. Gibeon took its place as servants near the holy things, learning that mercy does not erase truth, but reveals it even more clearly. This blend of justice and grace would be remembered every time someone asked why that day lasted longer than the others. The light finally began to fade, as if heaven were returning the clock to the earth. Yet what God had written in their hearts would not recede. When night finally settled, it was clear that the battle had pulled a thread that would run far beyond Gibeon, because the obedient nature that once served salvation will one day serve judgment again, and this promise will be fulfilled in our time. The same God who fought with Joshua against his enemies will rise again in the last days, and that is what we'll talk about in the next chapter. If on that day the light served to save, at the end creation will be summoned to judge. The report of Gibeon is not an isolated episode. It is a sign. It shows who rules the world's clock and who commands the elements. The message is clear. Nature is not autonomous. It obeys. The prophets announced times of shaking, signs in the sun and in the moon, the roar of the seas, lands that tremble, heavens that grow dark. This is not dramatic language. It is God exposing what has long been hidden. When he calls wind, water, and stone respond, at Gibeon hail opened the way for mercy. In the end, there will be judgments that cannot be explained by chance. There will be heavy hail against obstinacy. There will be darkness that silences arrogance. There will be earthquakes that expose the fragility of what seemed unshakable. These are not weather whims. They are acts of a reigning king. This does not contradict God's character. He does not love to punish. He delays, he calls. He prolongs the day when salvation requires it. But the time comes to separate what is firm from what is fragile, what is true from what is appearance. Judgment reveals what was already in the heart. That is why Gibeon matters today. The miracle of that day does not invite curiosity. It calls us to vigilance, to test what we hear, to check the fruit, to align life with the Word, to keep a clean conscience and hands ready to serve. Preparation is not a spectacle. It is routine. It is prayer before haste. It is obedience when no one sees. When nature enters the field, masks fall. Systems that promise safety turn to sand. Forces that seemed final lose their voice. Those who built on the rock remain. Those who learned to depend. Those who chose God's side when nothing felt urgent. Some will say it is all exaggeration, that signs have always existed, that it is better not to worry. But those who know the God of Gibeon know, the future does not depend on our opinion. The same Lord who extended a day for love will move the universe for justice. He will not be surprised. No one will stop him. What does that change now? It changes our focus. Instead of dates, faithfulness. Instead of predictions, character. Instead of anxiety, mission. Read the time in the light of Scripture. Live soberly. Treat every opportunity as a gift. Speak with God, guard your heart. Do the good within your reach, and keep going. Creation remains a witness. It was made by Him and for Him. When He commands, it responds. In Gibeon the light remained. Tomorrow, if necessary, nature itself will rise against every pretense that defies the Lord. This should not paralyze us. It should position us. The best preparation is not chasing novelties. It is to remain, to cultivate the same faith that sustained Joshua, confidence that asks the impossible, yet works to the end, obedience that doesn't take a holiday in the miracle, reverence that returns to God the glory of every victory. Those who learned this lesson do not fear what comes. They live alert. They know God can extend a day to save and shorten a time to judge. They know history has direction. They know the clock has an owner. And they choose to walk with Him now, not later. When the memory of Gibeon visits us, it leaves a simple message. God controls time and creation to fulfill His purpose. One day He made the light remain so salvation would not be left unfinished. In the end, He will move heaven and earth so truth is no longer negotiated. Between those two movements, there is room for a response, for repentance, for faithfulness. Night fell over Gibeon, but the lesson remained. We do not need more proof to choose. We need firmness. If nature obeys, we can obey as well. If heaven moves for a whole heart, we can offer ours. And here the story places us before the most practical decision of all. Before the next light rises, what does God expect of us now? That is the call the conclusion will place in your hands. There are moments when life asks for a decision, not about what has passed, but about who you choose to be from now on. The God who extended an entire day out of love for His people keeps opening space in His calendar of grace to transform hearts. The question is simple and deep. What will you do with the time He has placed before you today? A miracle is not an invitation to settle. It is a call to surrender. If the Lord held the light so the work would be complete, He can also hold your fears so you can take the next step. Maybe it is to forgive. Maybe it is to begin again. Maybe it is to return to sincere prayer. Victory is not born from isolated effort. It blooms where faith meets obedience. You do not need to command the sun. You need to incline your heart. There are decisions that change the course of an entire home. There are prayers that reorient a life. Choose today to walk with God in the light He is offering. Open the Word. Set apart daily time. Cultivate silence before the eternal. And speak with Him as with a father who listens. When faith becomes habit, hope no longer depends on the weather around you. If this message spoke to you, walk with us. Subscribe now, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which country and city you are watching from. Your participation strengthens this mission and reaches others who need a day extended by grace. More than watching stories, decide to live a new story with God. He still moves heaven and earth when He finds a whole heart, and when strength is lacking. Remember what we learned on this day that did not end. The light remains for those who choose to remain in His presence. Those who kneel find direction. Those who seek find open doors. Those who persist in communion see the impossible gain a name and an address. Because in the end, the truth is simple and eternal. People of prayer are people of power.